Welcome to Flip Lesson 30 for the 5th grade. Today we're going to start to look at the relationship between lots of different things. We're going to look at fractions, we're going to look at percentages, we're going to look at decimal places and the relationship between them, and we're just going to talk about how some of these things all fit together, and so we can think about all of these different things. So let's get started on this as we have a lot to cover today. We start by looking at our first picture right here. As we look at this picture, we want to know how many of the circles are shaded blue. And so this is where a fractional part would come in. We would realize that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 circles, and then how many of them are blue? That would be 3. So 3 out of the 5 circles are blue, or 3/5. Just like we could say, well, how many of them are white? 1, 2, 2 out of the 5 are white. All right, and so we have that idea. Now here, our second picture, we have a slightly different fractional parts, right? Still 5 circles, but now we have 3 colors. So there's 3 fractions that we can form from this. We could talk about blue circles, and I'll just try to be there for blue. We would say 1 out of the 5 circles are blue. All right, so basically what we're seeing here, before I finish this up, is our bottom number, right? Our denominator is the total number of circles, or the total number of parts, while the top number is the figure that we're looking for, the desired number we're looking for. So for example, if we go to yellow now, right, there are 5 total circles, 5 parts, and how many of them are yellow? 1, right? Just like if we go to white now, 5 total circles and 3 of them are white. And so we can see that relationship between a picture and a fraction. Right? From here we can talk a little bit about place values, because this is going to help us understand how fractions, decimals, percentages, place values all work together. We know that this is the ones place. All right, we know that's the tens place. You've looked at those ideas already this year. We haven't talked too much about these ones, right? But sometime in your math career you have learned about them. We call this the tenths, and we call this the hundredths. Hundredths, like that. All right? And these two ideas, tenths, relates to a fraction just like this, when the 10 is on the bottom of a fraction. And so if I were to write 1/10, here's a fraction, I could relate that to this, and I would say, okay, there's no whole numbers here, and it's 1/10. Right? As we see the word tenth, 1/10. Right here, 1/10. And so we can see that relationship. Right? Just like, if I were to erase this quickly, if I want to work with 100ths, right, I'm going to work with hundreds, right, 100 on the bottom. If I were to say that there are, let's just use a simple number like 9 100ths, right? Okay, that means there's 0 tenths and there's 9 100ths. So this is how the decimal would look, with a decimal point, a 0 in the tenths column, and a 9 in the hundredths column, because there's 9 100ths. Right? Just like you can put these two ideas together, if I were to put 100 here, right, I can fill this in, right, and I'll use green this time. Let's say there are, let's say 35, right, we would write the decimal just like that, 35 hundredths, and that's how we read that decimal. All right, okay, here's our initial picture as we look at decimals and place values and the relationships that we're seeing here. All right, let's move on and look at a couple different pictures, and let's talk about the relationships that we see here. Now, sometimes fractions work nice and easy. Sometimes we got to think a little bit, and sometimes we got to rely on our knowledge of just a couple fractions that we just want to kind of have memorized, right? And there's tricks to help us understand this, but we're going to work with them. So we'll start with this picture right here. We have a square, It's divided into 4 parts. 1, 2, 3, 4. So as a fractional, we would say there are 4 total parts to this square. Now, how many of those parts are shaded green? We would say 1. The fraction part of this is pretty easy to come by. Okay. Now, a 1/4, we want to think about this in terms of money and as a decimal and as percentage. And one way to think about this a little bit is to think about in terms of a money. In terms of a money? What am I saying? As money, right? We can think about the idea of a dollar, right? And if you were to divide a dollar into 4 equal groups, you would suddenly realize that you have 4 times 25 cents, right? 4 quarters equals $1. And now we're starting to see a relationship because 1/4 is also known as a quarter. Right? One of the 4 sections. If you're a basketball fan, you know what I'm talking about. Or if you're a football fan, you know what I'm talking about. You have 4 quarters in those sports, right? 1 out of 4. And so because we're starting to see this relationship, we can say, hey, 25 must have something to do with that decimal, right? We understand that 25 cents, right? If we were to use a decimal to write it as a dollar form, right? We could put that dollar sign there. That's 25 cents. That's equal to 1/4. Just like we would say that 25% is going to fit into that category also. All right? So we're starting to see that relationship. And hopefully this side of fractions, decimals, percentages is something you're a little bit familiar with, you've seen before. If not, there it is, right? And this is a good one to commit to memory. Let's look at our next picture, our purple triangle, right? We have a triangle, it's split into 2 parts, and one of them is purple. Now 1/2, you could think about in terms of money. We're going to look more at money in just a minute. But half of a dollar is 50 cents, right? Or if we were to write it with a dollar sign, we would write it just like this. Oh, which, once again, there's our decimal right there. Right? 0.5 or 0.50, and half of something would be 50%. Okay? And so we have that idea. Finally, our third example, right? Getting back to our quarters, right? So here's our third example. We got 4 parts again. We have 3. And now if we think back to what we just looked at with the quarters up above, we can say, okay, if I have 1/4 is 25%. If I have 3 times 25, or 3 quarters, or if I have 3 literally 25-cent pieces, that would mean I have 75 cents. Which, once again, gives us that nice, easy picture when it comes to understanding the decimal and the percentages and the relationship between these 2 things. All right? We're not done yet. Like I said, big lesson. We'll come back and we'll continue looking at this relationship, and this time we're going to use money. All right, we're continuing to look at our relationship between fractions, decimals, and percentages, and now we can really bring in this picture of money, and we can start talking about a lot of different things. We can see the picture of the dollar bill. Here you can see a visual representation of this. We can really divide this up, all right? And we can talk about all the different things we're seeing here. If we were to take 1/4, all right, if I take 1/4 like this, how would we write that as a fraction? Right? We've already talked about this example, so we would say that's 1/4, 1/4, right? 1 of the 4 to make $1, right? Because $1 is a whole amount. So that's 25 cents, and we would say that is also 25%. Okay, let's throw that one off to the side. Well, what if we had a dime? How's that going to relate? Think about it in terms of money. How many dimes does it take to equal $1? All right, hopefully that has come to your mind and you're quickly saying, oh, 10 dimes equals $1. All right, well, that would mean that if I only had 1 dime, I would have 1 out of the 10 parts to equal $1. So that would be 1/10. And we've kind of seen this example already back at the beginning of the lesson, and we would say that's 1, right? And here's our tenths column, right? 1/10. And we could really leave it like that. If you want to write it like that, that's okay. You don't really need to write it like that. We could really just leave this one blank, and our answer would be 0.1. And as a percentage, we would say, okay, this is 10%. 10%. And as we think about it in money, right, 10 cents is worth 10% of $1. Now here's the trick. What if you had 2 quarters and 1 dime? How would we write that as a fraction? Okay, so total, we have a total of 60 cents. In this sense, we would want to think about this in terms of tenths, right? Use this dime as a relationship, right? It's almost as if we have 6 dimes. That's another way you could write 60 cents. So if we have 6 dimes, that would be 10 total parts and 6 out of the 10 parts. Right? You can also write it as a whole numbers. 60 cents out of 100 total cents. So you could write it like that also, right? Because it takes 100 cents to make a dollar. And so there's 2 different ways to write it. This is a more of a reduced form of it, and technically we can reduce it more, but we're not going to worry about that today. So what is the decimal then? That would be right? Looking at a relationship to what we are doing up above here, we can see that, and then that puts us at 60%, just like that. Right? Here we see the relationship with that dollar again, right? Dividing a dollar up, here we're not really looking at it in terms of quarters, but if I divide it, you can see my white lines here. The blue lines aren't tracing very well, but I divide it into 4 parts. And so if I divide it into 4 parts, right, if I just wanted this one, I could say that's 1 out of the 4 parts, and we understand, looks like my file got messed up a little bit, so we would understand that it's 0.25, right? 25 cents is 1/4 of a dollar, which would mean we have 25% if I was just looking for that. So we can think about money in that sense too. Where'd the sample problem go? I bet you that dollar was the sample problem. I just did it for you. Let's just say no sample problem today. You've been a wonderful audience as you've looked at this longer video. So come ready to ask any questions you have about the relationship between fractions, decimals, and percentages. And in class, I'll have a sample problem. I'll probably throw some money up there or something, and I'll have you write the fraction, decimal, and percentage in class. And it'll be a good way to start the week or the day or wherever we are. All right, that is the end of lesson 30.